Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I want you to go ahead and open up Xcode, and you should get something like this. And as you can see, I have all of these apps here, and you probably don't have any apps, but what we need to do is we need to start a project here. And you can go ahead and you can do a whole bunch of this here. You can go ahead and learn more about Xcode, but one thing I will caution you is that the stuff that Apple gives you is incredibly complicated, and the point of my tutorial series is to take everything that they do and make it way more accessible for most people to understand. Because when I go and read this stuff, I understand it, but even some of the stuff is a little confusing to me. But I go ahead and I make sure everything is nice and easy for you to understand. So the one thing we need to do is need to go and create a new Xcode project, all right? And as you can see, this is what Xcode looks like here. And there are different kinds of of applications we can go ahead and use. So for example, we have the iOS applications and the OS X applications, all right? So let's just take a look at this here, because this is where Xcode originally started. Remember, iOS is newer than OS X, but for the most part, you can make a Cocoa application. So if you wanted to make something for, let's say, this for a MacBook Pro, you can go ahead and do that. There's the command line tool if we go ahead and make something, for example, wanted to learn how to program. There's all these frameworks and libraries, and this is the more old, kind of the old development where you're making something for computers. Now, I should mention at this point here that that the iOS version of any kind of iOS application is a stripped down version of OS X, meaning that there is not only less, but the interface, everything is less. And Apple tells you this quite a bit in their documentation here, that you want to make simpler apps. And if you were to come out of this tutorial series with absolutely anything, it would be you want to make really simple apps, because what ends up happening is people want to make websites, and it's just not good. But as you can see here, if we go back to the OS X, there's the Cocoa application, and that's pretty much it. However, in the iOS, we have different kinds of applications. Now, there's a master detailed application, and so if you wanted to have, let's say, a somewhat bigger app, you can go ahead and click this. There's a page-based app. This is a single view application, and then there is the tabbed application. Okay, so you can also see there's the utility application. That's more for, let's say, that's something a little bit different that you don't necessarily want to work with in this tutorial. And you can also make an OpenGL game. However, I would not recommend making an OpenGL game in Xcode, and you can also have an empty application. Now, the empty application is actually a good place to start, but what we're going to do is we're going to make a tabbed application because it's probably the most common one that people want to use. All right, so before we go ahead and click on everything, you can see that there is a library, and what libraries are is they are a section of code that you can use. So, for example, what ends up happening is that there are certain blocks of code that you want to use and certain ones that you don't. So let's say if you're making a video application, you need to bring in the video library. But if you're not making a video application, you don't bring in the video library. And if you're making something with, let's say, audio streaming, you bring in the audio streaming library, and you don't bring in the video library. So you want to make sure that you only have enough libraries. And this doesn't happen that often, but it can happen that if you just add in all the libraries, there actually can be conflicts between the libraries. So you only add in what you can do. All right, and you can see here there's in-app purchase, and then there's an empty here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and we're going to make a tabbed application, and we're just going to go ahead and push next, okay? And now we need a product name that's like this fun tabbed app, okay? You can name whatever you want here. Your organization name, you can put whatever you want. Again, this here is just to basically show you how to do this here. Now, one thing I highly recommend is making simple apps to start with. If you have a major application in mind, I suggest prototyping it first. I made this mistake when I was probably 12. I wanted to make a AAA game in my bedroom with my like really out-of-date computer, and that just did not work. So I wish someone had told me to make simple applications, and I highly recommend that you make a lot of simple applications first. Okay, so the company identifier, now this is actually really important, okay, and it's really important because when you upload to the App Store, you need to put this in here. Now, again, if you're prototyping, you can just put whatever here, but I'm going to go over what this identifier does, and you can see it goes com, and then what you need to do is you need to type in your name or your company's name. And remember, if you upload to the App Store, you have two options. You can either go through a company or you can go through a name. If you don't have, and of course this is going to differ across every country because every company deals with the way they do business differently, but if you have, let's say, a registered company or corporation, which you want to go through the company way, but if you have, let's say, something like a sole proprietor, or you're just kind of working out of your house, you want to use your name. And again, this differs across every country, so I can't go in and go over every country. But what you want to do is you want to put in your company identifier, which is going to be com dot your company name or your name, and then dot and then the last dot is going to be the product name, so it's going to be this fun tabbed app. Okay, it's going to be like that. And if that looks a little bit jumbled, it should look like that. And the reason why this identifier is there is for several reasons. One, everything in the App Store has its own kind of address, and in this address, it's there's also a lock there, meaning that every app has an address, which is going to be this, and the lock is whether people can access it. And this is just a security feature. So, for example, if someone downloads your app, they need to know what app it is, and that's where the address comes in, and they need to know whether that person can unlock it, which is the lock. So that's essentially what this is. The rest of this here, you don't need to worry about this, you don't need to worry about this, but let's just take a quick look at universal. So you either have the option of making an iPad or an iPhone or a universal app. What this means here is that the iPad app is going to be the iPad app is going to be just for iPad, the iPhone app is going to be just for iPhone, and the universal is going to be for both, meaning that you have one project and you want to make it into two. Now, if you're making an iPad app only, select iPad, and if you're making an iPhone app only, select iPhone. However, if your app can be done in both, then you want to go ahead and select universal. However, there is a lot of, it's not necessarily double the work. It's maybe 1.5 times the work to make it a universal. So what I recommend doing is just starting out with iPhone. Again, you want to think simple. My biggest mistake when it comes to any kind of business or production mistake that I've made over the years is I've gone too big too often. And I highly recommend starting simple. So we're just going to make an iPhone app, and remember, you can always make it again. In fact, it's actually really good. So if you prototype your iPhone app, and then you go over to make your iPad universal app, it's a lot better. The rest of this we don't really need to worry about. The next thing we need to do is we need to push next, and you're just going to go ahead and push create. It's going to create its own little folder. And what Xcode does is it creates a folder, and it creates all of the backend for you. And one thing I should talk a bit about Xcode is how it does everything. But as you can see, as these folders are here, that's essentially what the project is. All right? I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.